So I wanted to say thank you to the HEAL community because the things that I have learned in these 2 days far exceeds anything that I study, and I study regularly. I am probably a closet geek when it comes to understanding what all the trends are that are impacting the health and well-being of society. I'm an executive coach. I'm in the human development business. I think I've been in that business all of my entire life, just didn't know it, till I got the opportunity as a corporate officer to do really large-scale change initiatives with thousands of people. I finally said to my boss one day, I don't belong here anymore. I want to go out in the world and see if I can repeat this success. That was in 1996. I have never looked back. I work on all 6 continents, private companies, public companies, not-for-profit, educational space, helping humans be better humans. I remember sitting with our webmaster about 12 years ago. I was totally frustrated. He said, your website just isn't selling your business. And I said, okay, I give up. No marketing person has ever been able to do our business. Just put on there, humans being better humans together. That's it. That's what I do for a living. I am not going to spend 20 minutes talking to your heads. That's not my business. What I want to do is give you an opportunity to think a little bit about what's in the way of change. We have heard extraordinary ideas and thinking, and thank you, Barry, the results of what's happening in Dallas County are extraordinary. But I know that that happens because human beings agreed to shift their mindset. They were available for somebody to say something into their own awareness that disturbed them, and they didn't run for the hills. They stayed with the disturbance just a little bit longer, right? Okay. That's what we're going to talk about. So when I say the one job of leaders requires deliberate judgment, what's the one job? It's the tagline down at the bottom, which every single one of us is responsible for shaping a world where people love their life's work, whatever that is for you, whether that's parenting or being an incredible technologist or a researcher who works in healthcare or somebody who's trying to figure out how to get the education system to have our kids be thriving. They are our future. It doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, if I don't come into my work with a sense of solidly being rooted and available to bring all of my gifts, we're going to underperform to what our high aspiration is as a society. This is the promise of professional coaching, well done, that we are helping people come back home to themselves. So what I want to talk about a little bit with you, oh, that's not the right thing, right? I'm pressing my laptop. It's not moving the slides. Green button? Oh, these are the old slides, guys. Okay. Which button do I press to turn it off? Okay, we'll just leave it there. I'm going to read a little poem to you. As you're listening to this, I'd like you to think about some conversation you've had in the last 24 hours that disturbed you. Either it was the way the person delivered the message to you, or there was something in the content of the message and you thought to yourself, I don't agree with that. Like, I really don't agree with that. Or I have something else I want to say and this person isn't making any room for my point of view. Could be anything of that sort. So, got that in mind? I'm sure you all had at least one situation like that. At least I would hope so, since we're all here to be learners together. All right. This is called fail to notice. The range of what we think and do is limited by what we fail to notice. And because we fail to notice that we fail to notice, there is little we can do to change until we notice how failing to notice shapes our thoughts and deeds. What have we been talking about for 2 days? The fact that, yes, we have to have self-awareness, But you can't stop there. Our inability to go outside of self to other awareness and to understand that without having other awareness, we are acting out of self-interest, not collective interest. This is the reason why we don't make big societal change. It's not enough to do the inside job. Richard Lang, Scottish psychiatrist, those of you that might want to look up his work. Okay, I'm going to take you back to the slides now. I just wanted to share that particular poem. Judgment is the ability to form valuable opinions and to make good decisions. Couple of adjectives there, huh? Valuable opinions. Valuable according to who? And of course, what's a good decision? Who decides? Is it a decision that serves? Well, who gets to be served? If we do things in a one-size-fits-all, we know it doesn't work. Unfortunately, we've made judgment something that everybody is to avoid. How many of you have been in a workshop where you were told to be non-judgmental, or maybe to suspend judgment? Well, judgment, unfortunately, is just like breathing. It's essential to the human condition. And as Malika was just talking about, discernment might be a synonym for the word judgment. What we're really uncomfortable with is being judgmental, as if our judgmental feelings are the truth and the only truth, which of course isn't true. So I'm just giving you a reframing here to think a little bit about deliberate judgment. No, there we go. Considered decisions. And consciously and intentionally to reach sensible conclusions. So think about that conversation you had that was disturbing to you. In what way did that person communicate with you in a considered way? In what way did they reach a conclusion that you found sensible? As you look at the diagram on the right, was it something you were hearing that was a bias? We've talked a lot about that these 2 days. But where does bias come from? Go counterclockwise. Assumptions that we make that we don't check out. Preferences because it's what's made us successful. And habits that we learned and were rewarded for continuing to use. And guess what? All of these things are invisible. They work in the unconscious. On the left-hand side, you see frame of mind, attitude, thoughts, beliefs, habits, and routine actions. Anybody in here, okay, who's left that's a doc? I bet our hypnosis doctor will know this. The reticular activating system. How many of you know about the RAS? Ah, Barry, thank you. So, unfortunately, our bodies are predisposed biologically to conserve energy. This is how habits form. And of course, the good news is it lets us be in a situation without ever saying a word and knowing exactly what to do until we're uncomfortable. And we either leave the situation or we fight against the situation. Are you feeling how you were being in that disturbing conversation? If you got up and walked away, you wouldn't be the only one that would have done that without saying a word. That's the first barrier to change. If we can't sit in the discomfort a little bit longer, we're not going to have a transformative conversation. So it takes deliberate action. And the first piece of this is to notice. Hence why I gave you the poem. If we can't notice that something's caught our attention and be deeply curious about what it is that's caught our attention, it's hopeless to think change is going to happen. In my work with executives, they often will complain about the fact that nobody on their team will take risks or initiate bringing an innovative idea forward, or perhaps that they're not cascading the strategies for innovation down into their team. And they're very quick to judge that there's some weakness in these members of their team that they've made this assessment about. But the problem is they're operating out of bias, assumption, preference, and habit, and the way that they were promoted into the roles that they have. So what happens in a coaching interaction that's effective is they start to have some understanding, self-compassion. I'm attached to the way I see the world. I'm attached to the way success happens. And until I can loosen my own grip on what motivates me to the choices I make, I can't possibly see what I might be doing that's creating the same attachment for my team. And so fear is a word that we've heard. Any of those acronyms work for you? Fear of other people's opinions. Did that show up for you in that disturbing conversation? Did you hold back from expressing your own point of view because you weren't sure if that person would be available to hear it? Imagine if Heather, who stepped out of public education and went into creating her amazing school that is much more experiential and suited to the students she has, if she hadn't had the courage to challenge the status quo and leave, that wouldn't have happened. So, fear of other people's opinions, fear of missing out, and the last one is super important, the fear of success occurring. Some of you probably know Conversations with God, and it was quoted then in Marianne Williamson's book, Return to Love, and often is ascribed to Dr. Martin Luther King. But the punchline is, what we're afraid of is our greatness. So I was smiling when Derek was talking about how he pours into other people and what he learned about perseverance and discipline and energy. We're all having the same conversation. But I'd ask you to look interiorly right now. What stops you? What stops you from breaking through? Because unless you can do that and let go of the identity that you've worked so hard to acquire, you're not going to be part of the change formula. So the 3 skills that are on this slide, these are some ideas that I would give you to practice with. The first one, of course, is you want to see that a situation is worthy of pausing. Pausing always gives us more time than it takes to do it. Yes, I know, everybody thinks time is the 4-letter word that is a legitimate excuse for not doing the thing you know is the right thing to do. Well, what is time? It's our construction. Unless we pause, we don't have a hope or a prayer of figuring out that what I've just heard is a breakthrough idea. This is what was happening. That executive I was telling you about was writing white papers, sending them out 24 hours before his team would meet, and then couldn't figure out why nobody wanted to have a conversation. Not only had they not been given any time to absorb the information, but clearly he was signaling he had no interest in their point of view. And so you can see his assumptions and his bias, his preference for the way he was interacting, and his habit of sharing all of his content was the reason innovation wasn't happening and his team wasn't initiating. As he learned to pause and to realize, I'm looking in the mirror and the enemy is me, that was worthy of his attention. Exactly. Noticing all that's occurring and recognizing unconsciously, what are we choosing? This was very humbling for him. And it gave him an opportunity to realize that he was so overworking, which is why he'd hired me in the first place. He wanted to design his exit plan to get out of the organization. He was burnt out. Well, it only took him about 3 weeks to realize, oh, I'm the source of my burnout, and I want to go back to what I love about running a hospital system. And ultimately, stay with the question or the questions that reveal motivation. For him, it was all about raising the standard of care. No question about it. Only he didn't make any room for anybody else to say that they cared about the standard of care and that their experiences were every bit as legitimate as his. Ultimately, he and that team led the most successful M&A transaction in the state of Washington in its history. And it happened because he had the courage to be deliberate in his judgment and allow the space to open up. But these are the 3 micro skills. We skip right by this. We want to find, like, tell me the answer. Let's go get the resources deployed and let's go make it happen. But you're not going to sustain it if you can't find the internal process to be able to notice when something is worthy of your attention and begin to unearth with self-curiosity and then other curiosity what's actually occurring so that I can make a conscious choice. You'll notice that little diagram over on the left. Because a lot of my work over in my corporate life was always about problem solving, I'd see something that didn't work and I'd figure out some new ideas and we'd go implement them as if it was a little bit of a hamster wheel. Probably some of you have had that experience. And one day I said, you know what? All we're doing is repeating history. We have to stop talking to ourselves and go talk to some other people. And at the time, I remember walking into our ad agency, which was in-house, and I just loved Poe. He was a great guy. And I said to him, you know, I think we ought to rethink how we're going to market by starting with the customer and working our way backward. He kind of lifted up his head and he looked at me. And I said, seriously, we should be doing customer experience design of our advertising campaign. Now, today, you all know that as a very common thing. Customer experience, employee experience. But I can tell you that in 1983, when I said that to him, he kicked me out of his office. And I went down the hall to the marketing manager, and I gave him the whole spiel. And I said, look, we could be getting all kinds of intelligence from the field. They're talking to the customer every day. It was 10 years before we actually did the project that completely redesigned our branch offices. And the only reason they let us do it is because the chairman said, no more customer service, we need to do sales. Could have been done 10 years earlier. But my voice was discounted. I was a young woman, didn't look like them, didn't come out of their background in history. There were no women on the management team in 1983 where I was working. So I feel great it ultimately happened, but it required all 3 of those skills by the people who were in leadership when we did do it 10 years later. All of that's in our control. Every single one of us can do these. And this is the body of work we do at inviteCHANGE. It's called Generative Wholeness. What I kept hearing from CEOs, they would call me on the phone and they say, why do my leaders tell me you make their head hurt? And I chuckled the first time and I said, why don't you go ask them? The second time I got a phone call like that, I really did laugh out loud. And I said, I apologize, but I've now heard this a second time. I don't have an answer for you, but I'd love to know what you find out. And the third time I said, okay, that's it. And I went and did some research. I talked to 250 of our executive clients. And on the other side of that, what we began to see is that there's so much more than producing results, which is the simple definition of generative when you look it up in the dictionary. The other 3 are equally as important, and what I have found in Western developed democracies, we have a really good skill at creating something we can take to market and then putting it out in the market and making money. We are really bad at valuing, investing time in the imaginal thinking, originating new ideas, and doing the learning necessary to have something actually functionally operate. And to do that learning in a way that is inclusive, that the people who are going to go sustain that over time are on board with it from the very beginning of the rollout. Wholeness is even more important here, and it goes back to those 3 skills. If I'm not attuned to what I am experiencing, so take yourselves back to the conversation, were you aware that you were feeling disturbed? I asked you to reflect on it and think about it. Did you know in the moment? Or was it just something you sensed? The more we become aware of our own authentic self, the more ease we have to freely say, I disagree, or I have another point of view, or simply to even ask a question. So this is the body of work that we do in our coaching, is to help people come back home, to be alert to their own sensory experience when they're in a moment of tension or discomfort, and use it as the seed of innovation. One conversation at a time, one project at a time, one company, team at a time. It really is up to us. Those of you that do change work, you know, without internal coherence, we end up in conflict, resistance, and change doesn't occur. That internal coherence is what I've been talking about with those 3 skills, and that's the learning stage of being generative. And of course, ultimately, being able to create actions that produce a new result come from being able to have seen the entire environment of what's occurring. Moving ourselves from win-lose, pushing others down in order for me to be successful, and replacing that with win-learn. There is no way I will ever know everything necessary to be successful in the world on my own. There's just no way. So one of the great gifts of this last 2 days for me, I have learned so much about how each of you thinks so dramatically different from me. And I now have a whole new community of friends that I can tap into. And I'm only going to do that if I'm not concerned about whether or not I'm the smartest one in the room. Noticing what's worthy to pause and give our attention to, in order to see what's motivating my attachment so I can loosen my grip on it and make a different, more conscious choice. That's how we go to win-learn. Just a couple of quotes to close with. Good judgment comes from experience, and a lot of that comes from bad judgment. Of course, we all learn from our mistakes. And I really love Eleanor Roosevelt. In the long run, we shape our lives and we shape ourselves. The process never ends until we die. And the choices we make are ultimately our responsibility. When I think about what's helped me navigate the world at 5'1.5" with a birthmark on my face, and always thinking so far beyond my colleagues, that wasn't the only time that I had that experience of having a cool idea that got ignored for 10 years. I realized that I'm in charge. I have an inner authority. When I listen to that, deeply listen to that, and I trust that it's up to me to choose, I have a responsibility to choose based on that inner authority, life just goes a whole lot easier. And that's the principle of sovereignty. So I leave that with all of you and say thank you for listening.